Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
My name is Ashley Vallier, spelled Vallier.
And Ms. Vallier, what do you do for work?
I'm a forensic scientist at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory.
All right, so Mix Vallier, I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up.
Okay.
What we've been doing is we've had to turn the air conditioning off when we can't hear people.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, Mr.
And
Vallier.
how long have you been employed at the State Police Crime?
Just over 5 years.
And if I could ask you just a little bit about your educational background, starting with your undergraduate work, where did you go to school for that?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biochemistry and cell biology from University of California, San Diego.
And following your receipt of that degree, where did you go from there?
I have a Master of Science degree in biomedical forensic sciences from Boston University.
And once you received that master's, where did you go to work after that?
I worked at the Broad Institute for about 6 months before getting a job at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory.
And as far as your work at the Broad Institute, that's located in Cambridge, is that correct?
Correct.
And what type of work did you do at the Broad Institute?
I worked for the Center for the Development of Therapeutics department, doing quality control checks on compounds that they think could have potential to be therapeutic drugs.
And so you went to work for the Mass State Police Crime Lab, or the MSPCL, in early 2019, is that correct?
Correct.
And when you first went to work for the MSPCL, what unit were you initially assigned to?
The Trace Arson and Explosives Unit.
Is that the unit that you still currently work in?
It is.
And so you started with the lab as a forensic scientist 1, is that correct?
Correct.
And so what sort of steps or what kind of training did you go through in order to go from being a forensic scientist 1 to being a forensic scientist 2 that you are now?
A forensic scientist 1 is the initial job that you're hired as. After you've been at the lab for a year and once you're qualified and signed off to do casework, you become a forensic scientist 2.
Now, within the trace unit, can you describe to the jury sort of what types of things you're looking at, or what types of analysis that you do with regard to working in the trace unit specifically?
What I do or what the unit does?
First, as far as in general terms, what is a unit?
The unit has a lot of disciplines. So there's fire debris examination, explosives examination, serial number restoration, gunshot residue analysis, fibers, paint, glass, physical match, trace recovery.
And specific to yourself, what is it that you do within the trace?
I do gunshot residue analysis, trace recovery, and physical match analysis.
And as far as each of those respective categories, is those the things that you've done essentially your time there, especially as a forensic scientist too?
Yes.
Now, with regard to, as far as the physical match component that you were talking about, can you explain to the jury, just again in general terms, sort of what goes into that, or what are you looking at, what are you doing in regard to your analysis with that?
Physical match analysis is looking at 2 or more items that have broken or irregular edges and seeing if they fit together like a jigsaw puzzle.
And when you're doing those examination of various items with respect to that, what types of instruments are you using, or what types of ways are you looking at these from an instrumental perspective?
It's mostly the stereo zoom microscope, which is a microscope that's mounted on a stand so that it can look at larger objects and not just slides like in science class.
Now, over the course of your work with the lab, you're familiar with the lab is accredited, is that correct?
Correct.
And that's accredited by an organization known as ANAB?
Correct.
And with respect to that accreditation, what if any testing or what if any examinations or continuing education do you have to undergo in order for that accreditation, either for yourself or for the lab itself?
As part of the accreditation, analysts that are signed up to do casework do proficiency tests every year.
And have you done proficiency testing over the course of your 5 years with the lab?
I have.
And specifically, what types of areas have you taken proficiency testing in?
I've taken proficiency tests in gunshot residue analysis and physical match cases.
So with respect to sort of each of the various areas of work that you do within the lab, is that correct?
Except for trace recovery, but yes.
And with respect to each of those, as far as the proficiency testing was concerned, you've successfully completed each of those?
I have.
Now, if I could turn your attention to, at some point over the course of your work within the trace unit in the lab, did you become involved with the lab case number 22-02184?
I did.
And there's a name that's associated with that lab number as well, is that correct?
A name?
A name as far as a suspect or a defendant or something like that?
Yes.
And whose name is that?
Karen Reed.
And as far as your work within the trace unit, how is it that you came to be involved, or what piece of analysis did you become initially involved in with respect to Ms. Reed's case?
I was assigned to do physical match analysis on, well, many different items.
Before we get to the physical match, was there something, what if anything were you asked to do with regard to some clothing items associated with the John O'Keefe?
I believe I later received debris that was collected from those clothing items.
And so debris specifically, do you recall which clothing items you received debris from?
I do not without looking at my notes.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, may the witness look at her notes?
Yes, go right ahead.
And is your memory refreshed as to which items of clothing you looked at?
Yes, so it was, well, I didn't look at clothing. I just received the debris that was already packaged. So it was labeled as coming from jeans, boxer shorts, sneakers, a gray long sleeve shirt, and an orange t-shirt.
Now, with respect to each of those items had a lab sort of label number associated with it, is that correct?
Correct.
And is it your understanding that the larger piece of clothing would have been labeled 7- something, and then the debris from that clothing would have been labeled 7- same thing, point whatever? Does that sound familiar?
It does, yes.
And so with specific reference to item 7-18.18, that was debris from an orange t-shirt, is that correct?
Yes,
And specifically, I'm sorry, debris from an orange t-shirt and a gray long sleeve shirt, correct?
correct.
And from your analysis of that debris, what if any examination did you do of that debris that was provided to you within the trace?
So each of these items was packaged in a fold. And so I opened up the fold and looked at the items under the stereo zoom microscope and documented it with photos.
And as far as that item, 7-18.18, what, if anything, did you observe as far as contained within the debris from that item specifically?
May I look at my notes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. There was apparent dirt debris, many black, gray, blue, and orange apparent fibers, several pieces of red apparent plastic, several apparent hairs, one piece of green material, and one piece of clear apparent plastic.
And the clear apparent plastic, what, if any, measurements did you conduct with reference to that?
It measured approximately 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 an inch of an inch.
Now, from your analysis of those items, what, if anything, do you know where within the lab they went following your analysis there?
I believe another analyst in the trace unit then looked at those items.
And that would be are you familiar with another person who works in the trace unit named Christina Hanley?
I am.
And so what, if any, training does Ms. Hanley have that you do not have in order to conduct that sort of further analysis?
So Christina Hanley is the trace supervisor, and she is signed off to do casework in fibers, miscellaneous paint, glass. I see the other trace disciplines that I'm not.
So essentially, those items contained within that debris were something that you examined microscopically, made observations of, took measurements, and then they went to mishandling?
Correct.
Now, with respect to, you mentioned a variety of plastic items that you examined, correct?
Of the initial items that I looked at?
Yes.
Yes.
And what were those, generally speaking, what were those initial items that you looked at?
There were many different items containing that I believe were recovered from an address, but I would have to look at my notes to.
Go ahead.
So they were all labeled as as recovered from 34 Fairview Road.
And what types of items were they specifically that you had received?
So it was many pieces of apparent plastic and apparent glass, and one drinking straw.
And those items were generally labeled as items 7-5 through 7-19. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
And with reference to the process in general terms of when you receive these items, can you explain to the jury sort of your process and what you did and what you looked at as you went through each of these respective items?
Sure. So for beginning a physical match case, you always look at the questioned items first, which are the ones that you don't know where it came from. Like here, they're labeled as coming from the road, so you don't know where their actual source of origin is. And so what we'll do is we'll scan that item into my custody. And then I will document the packaging with photographs. And then I'll open that item and then document that item as it is. And if there are multiple pieces, each piece will get a designator like piece A, piece B, piece C. All this gets documented, written down in my notes and in photographs. If any of those pieces look like they could possibly fit together, then I will look under the stereo zoom and see if they do, in fact, fit together, and document it if they do. And then once I've finished documenting that, I'll repackage it in the original packaging. And then if there are multiple items, like in this case there were, then once that first item is sealed up, then I'll clean my bench and then I'll open the second item and do the same thing until all of the items have been documented.
And again, if you could describe to the jury sort of the physical process of what you did in this case, with respect to these items, as far as how were you looking at them sort of physically, what did you do with those items?
So like I said, I opened up each of these items individually, took photos, took notes, looked at them under the stereo zoom microscope, and then looked at my photos after I had looked at all of them. They'd all been packaged in their original packaging. And then I looked at the photographs to see if any of those pieces could possibly fit together. And then once I looked at the photos and saw that it looked like there were possible physical match fits among those questioned items, then I opened up those items and looked to see if they, like in real life versus just on photos, see if they could have a potential physical match. And then if it looked like it did, then I brought them together and looked at that in the stereo zoom to confirm if there was a physical match.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
This way I'm showing you a series of 9 photographs. Just ask you to look at those until you finish. Do you recognize those?
Yes.
And what do you recognize those to be?
Item 7-5.
And is that how it was presented to you or shown to you as far as the evidence bag that you opened and the items that were contained within?
I mean, this is just a picture of the seal, not the entire bag, but yes.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth will seek to introduce and admit as the next exhibits. No objection. Next, Blair, what's up on the screen is photograph 1905, which has now been marked as exhibit 262. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And is that the evidence bag that you were presented with regard to items labeled as 7-5?
That's the seal on it, yes.
Now, just in general terms, as far as this process that you're talking about, sort of fitting the puzzle pieces together, how long and how laborious a process did that entail?
In this case specifically,
Yes.
there were many items to look at, so it did take quite a bit of time.
And if I can have photograph 1908, and do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as exhibit 263?
I do.
Is that one of the pieces that you had from item 7-5?
Those are the 3 pieces in item 7-5.
And so 3 pieces from that were all red, apparent plastic pieces from that same item, is that correct?
Correct.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Yes. Showing you another 7 photographs, if you can take a look at those. if I can finish. And do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
The seal and then the items from item 7-6.
And what's contained in those photographs, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed when you were doing your analysis in the lab?
Yes.
Your Honor, Commonwealth will seek to introduce the minutes and next exhibits. No objection. So, Mr. Vallier, what's up on the screen, that's photograph 1921, exhibit 271. That is the evidence bag or box that contains the items in reference to lab item 7-6, is that correct?
Correct.
And with reference to that, as far as the labeling is concerned, these are items that were submitted by the state police, correct? As far as you know.
Yes.
And from the labeling that's exhibited in labeling that's being shown in Exhibit 271, that actually has an indication of who the submitting agency is and the date that the item was collected, correct?
Presumably, I don't know because that's not our lab's labeling system.
It's fair to say, as far as your observation of these evidence bags as you were opening them, or boxes as you were opening them, they had different dates on them, some of them, is that correct?
I don't know. I don't know.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 1924. Now, what's up on the screen that's now been marked as Exhibit 272. These were the items that were marked within that box or that bag of item 7-6, is that correct?
Correct.
It appears 2 pieces of clear plastic, correct?
Apparent plastic, yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you another series of photographs, if you could review those, look up when you're finished. And do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs, ma'am?
I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
The item 7-8.
And again, fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed in the lab with reference to item 7-8.
Yes.
I'll seek to introduce the minutes of the next. Okay. And Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I publish some of these photos to the jury as well? Now, Ms. Vallier, with regard to the items that were contained within these variety of bags or boxes that you had received as evidentiary items, what, if any, difference was there between sort of color, the size, the shape of the different items that you received?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Were they all sort of uniform as to their color, as to their size, as to their shape, or what, if any, differences did you know between them?
Between the items that we've already published, or just all of them?
All of them in general.
So some of the pieces were clear apparent plastic, some were clear apparent glass, some of them were red apparent plastic, some of them were silver colored apparent plastic.
And as far as the size of these pieces of plastic or glass that you had received, how would you describe sort of their physical size, shape, things of that nature?
Some of them were very small, and some of them were larger. I can't tell you the dimensions without looking at my notes.
And you took measurements with respect to each of the pieces that you analyzed, each of the pieces that you examined, and each of the pieces that you ultimately tried to find a match for, correct?
Correct.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 1931. And what's up on the screen is now marked as Exhibit 278. Do you recognize as the bag of box that contains item 7-8?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 1934. Now, what's contained in this exhibit up on the screen, number 279, do you recognize that as contents that were collectively sort of labeled as item 7-8?
I do.
And so from a variety of those different pieces that are depicted up on the screen in exhibits 279, each of them would have been respectively labeled as far as, say, 7-8.1 or 7-8 point something else. Is that fair to say?
So the laboratory numbering system where it goes 7-8.1, that's if you take like a subsample. So if I had collected like debris or something out of this item, that would then be labeled 7-8.1 because it's a new entry in our limb system. These are just the different pieces in 7-8. In my notes, I gave them labels such as piece A, piece B, piece C, all the way down to, well, however many there were.
You labeled them individually as sort of letters, is that correct?
Correct.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 1938. If you could zoom just a little bit in on that. The next way, let's pick it up on the screen within this exhibit 282. Do you recognize that?
I do.
Is that one of the pieces that was submitted within this as far as 7-8 that you examined throughout the course of your analysis here, correct?
Oh, it was. There's actually two pieces in that. There's the large one in the middle, and there's a very small one up in the corner.
Okay?
May I approach the witness again, Your Honor?
Yes.
Do you recognize those, ma'am?
I do.
What do you recognize those to be?
Photos that I took of item 7-10.
May I approach?
Yes.
I'm going to introduce you as the next exhibit. Oh, there's exhibits. And Ms. Vallier, what's depicted up on the screen is that the bag of box that contains item 7-10.
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 1955. And again, what's up on the screen is that the item that was contained within that evidence.
Yes.
May I approach the witness again, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you another series of photographs, if you could review those until we're finished. And Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
I do.
Or what do you recognize those to be?
The packaging that item 7-9 and 7-19 came in.
And what's contained within those photographs, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of those items when you received them at your station and within the trace unit?
It is.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
I'm going to seek to introduce and admit as the next. No objection. Verify clearly just in case these before you do take a look at those while the stenographer is marking those. And Your Honor, with court's permission, may I publish what's now been marked as 296 through 309 for the jury?
Yes.
And again, Ms. Vallier, what's up on the screen is that the evidence bag or box that contains those items that you were just testifying about, 7-9 and 7-19.
Yes.
Now, with regard to Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 1962. Ms. Vallier, now what's been depicted up on the screen and been marked as Exhibit 297. Ms. Gilman, if you could zoom in just a little bit on items of evidence, please. Now, contained within this are three clear pieces of glass or plastic, if you know.
3 pieces of apparent plastic.
Now, Ms. Gilman, if you could scroll down just a little. I'm sorry. Up. Thank you very much. The item that's contained above those 3 pieces of apparent clear plastic, what is that?
That is item 7-19. That is a black straw.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 1964. Ms. Gilman. And what's up on the screen next to Vallier now and has been marked as Exhibit 299, is that essentially the straw next to a ruler with its measurements, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, with reference to the photographs that I asked you to look at before, have you had a chance to review those?
I have.
And do you recognize what's contained within those?
I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
The photos I took of item 7-11.
And what's contained in those photographs of item 7-11, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed in your lab when you conducted your analysis in reference to this case?
It is.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth will seek to introduce and admit as the next exhibits. No objection.
Okay.
And again, next Vallier, what's up on the screen is that the bag, evidence bag that contains item 7-11.
Yes.
And for the record, that's been marked as Exhibit 310. Ms. Gilman, if I could have 1982. And again, Ms. Vallier, what's depicted up on the screen on Exhibit 311 is that the items or the pieces of plastic that were contained within the aforementioned evidence bag in the previous exhibit, item 7-11.
Yes.
Now, with regard to the photographs that I just placed before you before, have you had a chance to review those as well?
I have.
And do you recognize what's contained within those photographs?
Photos of item 7-14.
And what's contained in those photographs of item 7-14, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed in your lab when you conducted your examination in this case?
It is.
Thank you. Your Honor, the Commonwealth will seek to introduce in minutes the next exhibit. No objection. Mr. Vallier, if I could draw your attention up to the screen just for a moment, what's now been marked as Exhibit 325. Do you recognize what that is?
I do.
That's the bag that contained item 7-14, is that correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Gillen, if I can have photograph 2012. And again, Ms. Vallier, what's up on the screen is that the item that was contained and labeled as item 7-14 within that.
I'm sorry, I need all, please.
Yeah.
What's depicted on the screen is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what was contained in the exhibit bag from the previous exhibits, labeled as item 7-14.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I interrupted. Were you able to review the bulk of those photographs that I just placed before you?
Yes.
And do you recognize those?
Yes.
And what do you recognize those to be?
The photos of item 7-12.
If I could have, excuse me, ask those to be marked as the next exhibit from the next exhibit.
Okay.
Mr. Vallier, if I could direct your attention up to the screen, what's contained in what's been marked now is Exhibit 328. Those, the evidence pack that contained the items labeled as 7-12.
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph yours 2018. Ms. Vallier, directing your attention up to the screen and what's now been marked as Exhibit 329. Are those the items that were labeled collectively as 7-12 that were contained within that evidence pack from the prior exhibit?
Yes.
Now, as far as those photographs that I presented to you a moment ago, have you had a chance to review those as well?
I have.
And do you recognize what's contained within those photographs?
I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
The photos of item 7-13.
And what's contained within those photographs, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what was contained or labeled as item 7-13?
It is.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth, may I approach?
Yes.
Commonwealth seeks to introduce the minutes and next exhibit. And Ms. Vallier, what's depicted on the screen in that photograph, which has now been marked as Exhibit 343, is that the evidence bag that contained the items labeled as 7-13?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2000. And Ms. Vallier, directing your attention to the screen, those are the items contained within that exhibit bag from prior exhibits that have been collectively labeled by the lab as 7-13.
Yes.
As far as the photographs that I had placed before you, have you had a chance to review those?
I have.
And do you recognize what's depicted in those photographs?
I do.
What do you recognize those to be?
Photos of item 7-15.
And what's contained in those photographs, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what was contained in items, item 7-15?
It is.
Your Honor, Commonwealth seek to introduce the minutes of the exhibit. No objection.
Okay, hold on one second, Madam Court Reporter. Mr. Lally, those are the last exhibits we'll be doing today.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Ms. Gilman, if I can have photograph 2072. Ms. Blair, if I could direct your attention to the screen, you recognize this as the evidence back that contains item 7-15 that's now been marked as Exhibit 352.
I do.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2077. Again, Ms. Blair, what's up on the screen are those the items that were collectively identified by the lab as item 7-15 from that evidence bag contained in the prior exhibit.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Ms. Vallier, as far as your analysis was concerned with regard to each of these items, and we'll get to that a little bit, I think, the next time, but with regard to the labels that you assigned to them as far as letters of the alphabet, A through whatever letter that you went, when you were conducting your sort of physical match analysis, how was that shown on a particular piece, or did you label those pieces, or how were you able to sort of quantify that?
The pieces that were large enough to, I printed out labels from a label maker with the lab number, the item number, and then the piece that the letter that I assigned it, so ABC, and my initials, and those are on the pieces.
And then as far as those pieces were concerned, if you were able to find some consistency between, say, piece A and piece B, and you were able to sort of fit them together, what, if anything, did you do to memorialize that sort of physical match?
Within the same item, if there were two pieces that fit together, I documented that with photos, wrote it down in my notes, and then if it was within the same item, I held it together with tape, and then repackaged it still together as a single piece.
And as far as these consistencies or the matches that you were examining or looking for, was that solely within piece to piece, or at some point did you also look at sort of a larger piece as far as a housing unit for a taillight?
For this case?
Yes.
Yes.
And with regard to the pieces that you had sort of put together, what, if anything, were you able to do with regard to some of those pieces and the taillight housing, item 3-1? From
those items that we just saw, I was able to piece one larger piece with many of those pieces all fit together into one piece that I then called piece 1. There were some other pieces that also fit together among those question ones that I called pieces 2, piece 3, piece 4, and piece 5. Piece 1 was a physical match with item 3-1, the taillight.
Your Honor, if, I think that may
Okay.
be wrong.
All right, so, Ms. Vallier, we're going to have you back on Wednesday. Okay, but,
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am. Now, Ms. Vallier, when we had left off the other day, I believe you had just looked at some photos of item 7-16, is that correct? If you recall.
It's been a few days.
That's what, Your Honor.
yes.
Hey, Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's in those photographs? And what do you recognize those to be?
Photos that I took of item 7-16.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth will seek to introduce in a minute the next exhibits. Can I just see them, please? Thank you, Your Honor. With the court's permission, may I have those published for the jury?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2059. And Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen as that photograph, which is now been marked as Exhibit 332?
Yes.
Is that one of the items from 7-16 next to a ruler with the measurements corresponding to that item?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2081. And Ms. Vallier, what's up on the screen is that another piece from 7-16 that's now been marked as Exhibit 369?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Vallier, as far as this particular item is concerned, with reference to sort of the texture of that particular piece of plastic, what, if anything, did you note or observe in reference to that?
I'm sorry, the texture?
I'm sorry, do you have the laser pointer in front of you or not?
Oh, yes.
Now, as far as the surface area of that particular piece of plastic, how would you describe that?
I mean, there are little dots on it. They're not just like dimples of a sort.
Stippling or dimples of some sort on a piece of plastic?
Yes.
And as far as those stipplings or dimples on the piece of plastic, were those flush with the rest of the plastic? Were they raised a little bit? How were they sort of configured?
I don't recall.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2064. And again, Ms. Vallier, what's up on the screen has now been marked as Exhibit 371. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And that is another piece next to a ruler, essentially memorializing its measurements from item 7-16. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
Ms. Vallier, I'm showing you another series of 11 photographs. Ask you to look at those and look up as we finish.
Can you tell Mr. Yannetti what those are so he can look at his copies?
Counsel was shown each and every one of the photographs prior to the court coming in today. But I'm happy to give them to counsel as well.
I'm just trying to save some time.
Right, I just need to know the particular evidence numbers at the end.
Okay.
Do you recognize those?
I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
Photos that I took of item 7-16.
So additional items contained within item 7-16, is that correct?
Yes.
And what's contained in those photographs, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed during the course of your examination and analysis in regard to item 7-16 in this case?
Yes.
Thank you. Your Honor, the Commonwealth will seek to introduce and admit as the next 11 exhibits.
Any objection?
I'm not going to have an objection, but again, I just need to know what numbers.
And Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen as Exhibit 373?
That was one of the photos I just looked at.
And as far as the evidence bag containing items from 7-16, is that correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 2039. And again, Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 374?
I do.
And what do you recognize those to be?
A photo that I took of item 7-16.
And that would be the entirety of the items contained within that evidence bag from the prior exhibit, is that correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 2051. And again, Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's depicted up on the screen?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
A photo I took of item 7-16.
And in particular, one of the,
Can you speak up a little, sir?
Yeah.
And a little
Yes.
slower? Thank you.
in particular, one of the red plastic pieces from item 7-16, is that correct?
Yes.
And for the record, Your Honor, that's Exhibit 376.
Okay.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2053. And again, Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 378?
I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
One of the photos that I took of item 7-16.
And lastly, from this batch, Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2055. And again, Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 380?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
It's one of the photos that I took of item 7-16.
And this particular item up here as Exhibit 380, you describe sort of color, shape, what you observed from this particular item?
That's a piece of red and clear apparent plastic.
So a piece of red plastic with a piece of clear plastic sort of within the same piece, is that fair to say?
Within the same piece?
Yes.
Apparent plastic, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Vallier, if you could explain to the jury again sort of the process that you undertook as far as these various pieces from these various evidence item numbers. What was the process that you undertook as far as doing your comparison?
So first of all, everything is documented. Each item is documented separately. with photographs, notes. I put a label with the case number, item number, and then A, B, C, etc. If there are multiple pieces in it, a little label on each piece. I look at the photos to see if there are any similarities, dissimilarities, to see if there are any potential pieces to compare. And then if I do think that there are pieces that could be compared, I'll open those items and keep them all separate, and then look at them in real time to see if it does actually look like they could be consistent before I bring them close together. And if it still looks like they could be consistent, then I'll bring them together to see if there is an actual mechanical fit, and then I'll document that and look at it under the stereo zoom.
And the device or the instrument that you're looking at, again, could you describe for the jury again what that is?
So the stereo zoom is also called a stereo microscope. It's a microscope that is on a stand, so you can put larger pieces of evidence underneath it.
Now, as far as that initial sort of looking at things together, are you doing that, how are you sort of organizing that? Is that by item number, by color, or by something else?
I did this by color because it seemed the easiest way to organize all of these pieces.
And then within the individual item number, say just randomly 7-15, for example, are you looking at that? If there's multiple pieces within an item, are you looking at the consistency within the item prior to looking, sort of crossing between 715 to 716? Is that the process?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Very long question, very confusing, my fault. So as far as the comparison is concerned, are you looking solely within an item? So if an item has multiple pieces, are you comparing just those pieces within that item first?
As part of my initial examination, when I'm documenting that item, if there are multiple pieces, I'll compare those pieces first.
And then if there are any pieces that are consistent, are you then cross-referencing that item's pieces with pieces from a different item?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Ma'am, I'm showing you another series of 19 photographs. Just ask you to review those and look up. And do you recognize what's contained in those photographs, Ms. Vallier?
I do.
And what do you recognize them to be?
These are photos from my case of either within the same item that had a mechanical fit that I'd then taped together, or of mechanical fits from between different items.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Commonwealth to seek to introduce in a minute the next 19 exhibits.
No objection, but have I seen those yet?
This morning?
Right,
I was going to hand them to you after they were marked.
that's fine.
Before you get to the photos, Ms. Vallier, if I could just ask, as far as your analysis was concerned with reference to each of these items, if I could, excuse me, just ask you some questions about that. Starting first with item 3-1, that was the passenger side taillight housing, is that correct?
I believe so.
And you analyzed pieces of that along with the sort of housing unit itself, is that correct?
So, do you mean like there was like the taillight and then there were smaller pieces also in the?
Correct.
Yes.
And you took measurements of the various pieces that you observed?
I did.
And did you record those within your notes?
I did.
Do you recall what those measurements were?
Not without looking at my notes.
With the court's permission, may the witness refer to our notes?
Yes, sure. Your witness is ready, Mr. Vallier.
And what were those measurements?
Do you want all of them?
Just in yes. I mean, first starting with reference to the taillight housing assembly.
Okay, so the taillight I called piece A in this case, and it measured approximately 14 inches by 9 inches by 8 1/4 inches.
And then which of the pieces that were contained within that sort of taillight evidence bag did you compare to the taillight housing itself?
So there was a lot of like very, very small pieces that I took pictures of, but they're very, very small, so they were not suitable for comparison, so I didn't look at those. There were some larger pieces that I did that were suitable for comparison, so I did look to see if they fit in with piece A.
And with regard to that analysis of whether or not they fit in with piece A, which of those pieces did you find did fit?
So amongst item 3-1, let's see. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Piece A and piece B fit together mechanically, and then piece A and piece F fit together mechanically.
F is in Frank. I'm sorry.
F is in Frank, yes.
It may be pretty apparent, but if you could, Mix Vallier, just expound upon what you mean when you say they fit together mechanically.
So when things break, they break in a unique pattern. Like it's pretty different every time. So a mechanical fit is bringing two things with broken edges together to see if they were originally part of the same item. To see if they, if the broken edges align. And if they do, then that's a mechanical fit.
Now, turning your attention to item 7-5, you looked at those various pieces together as well, is that correct?
I believe so.
And were there any 3 pieces in total from 7-5, so A, B, and C, is that correct as well?
May I look at my
Yes.
notes? Yes.
And what, if any, match did you find with within item 7-5?
There were no mechanical fits amongst those 3 items, or 3 pieces of the item.
And with reference to item 7-6, there were 2 pieces, A and B, within that, is that correct?
Yes.
And were there any physical matches within those 2 pieces of item 7-6?
No.
Now, turning your attention to item 7-8, do you recall how many pieces were contained within that?
There were 14 pieces.
And of those 14 pieces, they were each compared to each other, is that correct?
Correct.
And what, if any, mechanical fit did you find between the pieces contained within 7-8?
So pieces C and D were found to fit together mechanically, and then pieces E and F were found to fit together mechanically.
Your Honor, may we approach, please?
Mix Vallier, turning your attention to item 7-9, you analyzed 3 pieces from that, is that correct?
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay.
You know what, Mix Vallier, you can just look the whole time.
Okay. Sorry, could you repeat your question?
How many pieces were contained again within item 7-9?
3 pieces. 7-9.
Yes.
3 pieces.
And what, if any, physical matches did you find contained within that item 7-9?
There were no mechanical fits.
And with reference to 7-10, how many pieces?
1 piece.
And with reference to item 7-11, how many pieces contained within that?
6 pieces.
And what, if any, physical matches did you find contained within 7-11?
There were none.
In 7-11, how many different colors of pieces were contained within 7-11?
There was black, red, and colorless apparent plastic.
Now, with reference to item 7-12, how many pieces were contained within that?
There were 14 pieces.
And of those pieces, again, how many different colors or how many different colors of pieces were within 7-12?
They were all colorless.
And from those, what, if any, mechanical fits did you observe or did you find within item 7-12?
Okay. So there were 3. Do you want me to say all the pieces that fit together?
Please.
Okay. So pieces B, C, D, F, and K all fit together. Pieces E and I fit together. And pieces M and N fit together.
Now, turning your attention to item 7-13, how many pieces were contained within item 713?
3 pieces.
And how many different colors of items were contained within 7-13?
It was red and black apparent plastic.
What, if any, physical matches did you find within item 7-13?
There were none.
Turning your attention to item 7-14, how many pieces were contained within that?
There was 1 piece.
And what color was that one piece?
It was colorless.
And turning your attention to item 7-15, how many pieces were contained within that?
There were 8 pieces.
And as far as those 8 pieces, how many items were of different color? What color were they?
They were red and colorless apparent plastic.
And of those 8 pieces, what, if any, mechanical fits did you find within them?
So piece F and piece H were found to fit together.
And turning your attention to item 7-16, how many pieces were contained within 7-16?
There were 7 pieces.
And of those 7 pieces, what, if any, differences in color were the 7 pieces within 7-16?
It was red and colorless apparent plastic.
And of those pieces, what, if any, mechanical fits did you find within 7-16?
So pieces A, C, and D fit together mechanically.
Now, with reference to those pieces, once you did those inspection from or analysis from the individual items, what, if anything, did you do with those individual items with reference to the taillight housing?
So before even comparing it to the taillight, I compared all of the questioned items to each other. So that's the 7-5 to 7-19 to see if any of those pieces would fit together. And amongst those, I was able to make 5 larger pieces that I called piece 1 through piece 5.
And of those larger pieces, which of those larger pieces were you able to mechanically fit together prior to comparing them to the taillight housing?
Sorry, can you?
From your analysis of those larger pieces and analyzing them together with other larger pieces, what, if any, opinions did you draw? What, if any, conclusions did you come to as far as your analysis of those pieces?
So for the larger pieces amongst the different items that fit together mechanically, I can see that those items were once a part of the same unit.
And so I guess what I'm asking, Ms. Vallier, is with reference to, say, item 7-6 or 7-5, were the items in and of themselves, which of those items were you, if any, were you able to find mechanically fit with each other?
Amongst sorry, are you asking me which specific items made up piece 1?
Correct.
Okay, I can. Okay. Okay, so piece 1 contained pieces from items 7-5, 7-8, 7-10, 7-11, 7-13, 7-15, and 7-16.
And then, so based on their mechanical fit, what, if any, conclusion did you draw in reference to those several items?
That those specific pieces from all of those items were at one time together as part of a larger unit.
And then what, if any, comparison or analysis did you do of items between item 7-15 and item 7-16?
So pieces from item 7-15 and 7-16 were part of piece 1. I could look through my notes and see if they're a part of any of the other pieces that I fit together.
With the board's permission.
Okay.
Okay, so piece 2 consisted of pieces from item 7-15 and 7-16.
And then with reference to items 7-6 and 7-11, what if anything, did you observe between the pieces of those?
Okay. So piece 3 consisted of pieces from item 7-6 and 7-11.
And similar to what you had described before with 7-15 and 16, as far as them mechanically fitting together, and now I'm talking about 7-6 and 7-11, what, if any, conclusions did you draw in regard to that?
That those pieces from item 7-6 and item 7-11 were at one time together as a larger unit.
And then as far as item 7-8, 7-9, and part of 7-16, what, if anything, were you able to do with reference to those?
So piece number 4 consisted of pieces from item 7-8, 7-9, and 7-16.
And as far as mechanically fitting those pieces together, again, what, if any, conclusions did you come to in reference to those items 7-8, 7-9, and 7-16?
That those pieces from item 7-8, 7-9, and 7-16 were at one time together as a larger unit.
Now, lastly, with reference to this, in reference to item 7-12 and 7-14, what, if any, analysis did you do with reference to pieces from those items?
I have item 7-11 and 7-12 that fit together for piece number 5.
And Your Honor, with what's now been marked as exhibits 384 through 402, if I could ask to publish some of those to the jury.
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have photograph 2069. And Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen as now exhibit 384?
I do.
And what are we looking at here?
Within item 7-16, those are pieces that were mechanically fit together.
And Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's now been marked as exhibit 386?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
So that is what I called piece 1. So the piece that is made up of apparent plastic pieces from many of the different items.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could ask you to just zoom in a little onto the middle of that photograph.
What exhibit number is this, Mr. Lally?
Yes, Your Honor, this is 386. And from sort of this zoomed-in version of 386, Ms. Vallier, are you able to now see some of the stickers or the evidence stickers that you would put labeling each of these pieces?
Yes.
And if you could, just using the laser pointer, draw the jury's attention to where those would be within this photograph.
So these labels right here are the labels that I put on each piece individually when I initially examine it. So all of the little white labels.
Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen and what has now been marked as exhibit 387?
I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's still piece 1. It's just from a different angle.
And Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen now that has been marked as exhibit 390?
I do.
What are we looking at here?
That's still piece 1 from another photos taken from another angle.
And Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as exhibit 392?
I do.
What are we looking at as exhibit 392?
That is another angle of piece 1.
Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as exhibit 395?
I do.
And what are we looking at in exhibit 395?
So that is piece 2.
Ms. Gilman, if you could just zoom in a little bit on the stickers on this photograph. And Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as exhibit 398?
I do.
What do you recognize that?
That is piece 3.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could zoom into the stickers. Thank you. Ms. Vallier, do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as exhibit 399?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That is piece 4.
Again, if you could zoom in just a And Ms. Blair, do you recognize what's up on the screen now that's been marked as Exhibit 401?
I do.
And what do you recognize as?
That is piece 5.
Thank you. Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
So, Ms. Vallier, earlier I'd put before you another 23 photographs. Do you recognize what's depicted in those 23 photographs?
I do.
Or what do you recognize that to be?
That's comparisons between item 3-1 and piece 1.
And item 3-1 again was the tail light, is that correct?
Correct.
Your Honor, with the court's Commonwealth would seek to introduce and admit as the next exhibits.
Okay.
Blair, do you recognize what's now up on the screen that's been marked as Exhibit 403?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That's one of the photos comparing item 3-1 and piece 1.
And Ms. Blair, do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 411?
I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
That's the contents of item 3-1.
And that's prior to you. At what stage of this analysis or comparison process is that?
So that's when I initially looked at item 3-1.
Thank you. And Ms. Blair, do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 431?
I do.
And what are we looking at in 431?
So on the left is item 3-1, piece A, and then on the right is piece 1.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have 2151. And Ms. Blair, do you recognize what's up on the screen, which has now been marked as Exhibit 432?
I do.
What are we looking at in 432?
That is piece 1 on top of item 3-1 in a mechanical fit.
Is that the mechanical fit that you were talking about earlier in your testimony?
Yes.
So, Ms. Vallier, in reference to those items that you testified to earlier in item 3-1, the taillight housing, what, if any, conclusions regarding those items as far as a physical match? What, if any, conclusions did you come to?
That item 3-1 and the pieces that make up piece 1 were at one time together as a larger unit.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
May we approach Ron?
Jurors, feel
Good morning.
Good morning.
You have testified that when evidence comes into the crime lab, it's given crime lab evidence or item numbers, correct?
It's given a case number, and then each piece of evidence gets its own individual item number.
Okay, and if you can just keep your voice up because we want to make sure that the last jurors here can hear you. Consistent with that policy, the evidence that your lab received in this case was also given those item numbers, correct?
Correct.
So I'd like to ask you about one particular item number in this case, 7-18.18. Would you agree with me, and feel free to check your records, but would you agree with me that that was the item number given to, quote, debris from orange t-shirt and gray long sleeve shirt, end quote?
You can go ahead.
Okay.
And again, it's 718.18.
Debris from orange t-shirt 7-17 and gray long sleeve shirt 7-18-JO.
Terrific. Item 7-18.18 did not include the orange t-shirt itself, correct?
No.
Believe that you just testified that was given a different item number, which was 7-17?
I believe so.
And 7-18- also did not include the gray long sleeve shirt either, correct?
I didn't look at 7-17 or 7-18. I only received the debris from.
Okay, well, yeah, that's my point. So with regard to the orange T-shirt and the gray long sleeve shirt, those were given separate item numbers, and you examined what was the debris allegedly from those shirts, right? 7-18.18, correct?
Correct.
And that debris consisted of different categories, did it not?
There were different different things inside of it, yes.
Yes, different categories of things, correct?
I'm sure.
All right, so one category was dirt and debris, correct?
Yes,
You did not test the dirt and debris, correct?
correct.
Another category was, or were, I should say, several apparent hairs.
Yes,
And you did not test those hairs, correct?
correct.
And another category, I believe you've already testified to, consisted of several pieces of red apparent plastic and one piece of clear apparent plastic that measured 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch. Is that accurate?
Okay, so there were several pieces of red apparent plastic, and then one piece of clear apparent plastic measuring approximately 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch. Yes.
Okay. And I apologize for continually reminding you, but I'm just mindful that everybody needs to hear you. So to the best you can, if you can just keep your voice up, I'll try to do the same. So when those several pieces of apparent red plastic and one piece of apparent clear plastic came into your possession, those pieces were obviously not embedded in either shirt when you examined them, correct?
I don't know. I didn't examine the shirt.
Well, so to my question, the pieces that you saw were not embedded in a shirt when you examined them, correct?
Correct.
And again, that's because you never took possession of any shirt in this case, correct?
Correct.
The pieces were loose and they were not embedded in anything, correct?
The pieces were, well, I examined the debris from the shirt. I don't know what the person who packaged it did to collect that.
Okay. And so it goes without saying that you never saw those pieces on either the orange shirt or the gray long sleeve shirt, correct?
I did not.
And you obviously had no control over how the evidence was handled before it came into your possession, correct?
We have a chain of custody in the laboratory, but I did not follow the evidence as it went through the chain.
Okay, and we'll talk about the chain of custody in a minute. Before this evidence came into your possession, you did not witness who seized it, correct?
Correct.
You did not witness who handled it, correct?
Correct.
Before it came into your possession, you don't know who had access to that evidence, correct?
So all of our evidence is stored in locked facilities.
Right, but I guess let me modify that question. Before it came to your lab, you don't know who had access to that evidence, correct?
Correct.
You also don't know, before it came to your lab, whether the shirts in question were at all times kept separate from the red or clear plastic pieces of, well, I said pieces of plastic that were in the possession of certain members of the state police, correct?
Correct.
The chain of custody at the crime lab started with noting the state trooper who actually delivered the evidence to your lab, along with the date, correct?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. The chain of custody at the crime lab starts with noting which state trooper delivered the evidence to your lab and the date that he or she delivered it, correct?
Or a crime scene responder, but the person who drops off the evidence to the laboratory, yes.
Okay. And in this case, which particular state trooper delivered the orange T-shirt and gray long sleeve shirt to your crime lab?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, which state trooper delivered the pieces of red and clear plastic pieces, I should say, that you just testified about?
The item 7-5 to 7-19?
Right. The several pieces of red apparent plastic and one piece of clear apparent plastic measuring 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch. That's what I'm referring to.
Wait, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes. you understand what I'm talking about, right? In terms of the several pieces of red apparent plastic and then the one piece of clear plastic that you have the measurements for?
You're talking about the apparent plastic that I noted in the debris of 7-18.18?
Correct. Which state trooper was it that delivered that?
Do you know?
Sorry, that's that's an odd question.
I'm sorry, I was sorry.
I don't know if you want her to repeat it, Ms. Giannetti. Go ahead. You have to repeat that, please.
So evidence is
No,
submitted to...
what you just said that he missed.
Oh, I said that's kind of an odd question.
Oh, not for me.
So
Do you have a record of that?
a record of what?
A record of which state trooper delivered that debris to the lab?
So it wouldn't be delivered as like debris. It would be delivered as the individual piece of clothing, which then got assigned item 7-18, I believe. And then as someone analyzes it, each offshoot of that piece of evidence gets a 7-18 point something. So the debris collected from that shirt is 7-18.18.
Okay, all right. Listen, when those several, actually, let me strike that. Get to where I was.
Take your time, Ms. Giannetti.
Okay, so I want to confirm with you that when you were assigned to this case, you were aware that the date of the incident was January 29th of 2022, correct?
Yes,
All right. And it's your testimony that you don't know which state trooper delivered the shirts to the lab, correct?
I could look at my notes because I have a printed chain of custody.
Sure, if you would check your notes for that, please.
Okay. So submission 7, which is everything that's item 7- in this case, was submitted by Trooper Michael Proctor, I believe.
Oh, that was the answer to my
Okay.
other question. Thank you. How long after January 29th of 2022, according to your records, did Michael Proctor deliver that clothing to the crime lab?
It was delivered on March 14th, 2022.
Okay, so about 6 weeks or so after January 29th, is that accurate?
Sure.
Given that your lab received this evidence on March 14th of 2022, you can't testify to the chain of custody of the clothing or the pieces of plastic prior to March 14th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
And except for the taillight housing that was seized by Maureen Hartnett, except for that, your chain of custody at the lab for the 2 shirts plus the pieces of plastic in 7-18.18, that began on March 14th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
So between January 29th of 2022 and March 14th of 2022, you do not know what Michael Proctor did or didn't do with the orange T-shirt and gray long sleeve shirt, correct?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
I don't know.
Now, I'd like to discuss with you, if I might, Michael Proctor's submissions of the pieces of plastic that you've testified about. Your lab received from Michael Proctor several different evidence bags containing red, clear, and black pieces of plastic, correct?
Correct.
Some of those evidence bags contain relatively small pieces of plastic in them, correct?
Correct.
And some of those evidence bags contained larger pieces, right?
Correct.
The evidence bags that you received listed the dates of recovery of those pieces of plastic, did they not?
I believe so.
And the evidence bags that you received also listed the officer who recovered the plastic pieces, right?
I believe so.
And again, when you receive those evidence bags, whatever numbers are on them, your lab assigns them your item number, correct?
Correct.
So I'd like to ask you first about item number 7-8. Do you have a record of that?
Yes.
Now, that evidence bag, item number 7-8, contained multiple pieces of red, black, and clear pieces of plastic, correct?
It contained 14 pieces of red, black, colorless, and silver-colored apparent plastic. Yes.
Okay. And the date of collection was February 3rd of 2022?
Go right ahead.
Item 7-8,
Yes.
February 3rd, 2022.
Okay, and that was, if you have that in front of you, that was also collected by a trooper named DeChico, correct?
Oh, yes, correct.
If I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
So I show you a photograph. Can you identify what that is?
Yes.
What is that?
That is the handwritten label on item 7-8.
That would have been the evidence bag that your lab received and gave item number 7-8 to it, correct?
Correct.
And that appears to be an exact, photograph.
I don't think
of the
there's an
actual bag.
objection to it, so we
Yeah,
can
that's
just put it
true.
in.
Okay. May I offer that, Your Honor?
Sure.
May I display that for the jury, Your Honor?
Okay.
And this is that is what I just showed you on the screen, correct?
Correct.
That's where it's indicated what the date of collection was and which trooper collected it, correct?
Correct.
And you would agree with me that that date, February 3rd of 2022, was only 5 days after the January 29th blizzard, correct?
I don't recall the dates of blizzards, but
Oh, okay. Well,
sorry.
let's put it the date of the incident. You would have
Okay.
previously testified that was January 29th, correct?
correct.
All right. And February 3rd was 5 days after that, right?
Yes.
All right. I'd like to show Exhibit 279, please, which is 3 days, please.
Okay?
Now, Exhibit 279, which is displayed on the screen now, this is one of the photos taken of some of the contents of item 7-8, is it not?
That's the entirety of the contents of item 7-8.
Okay. You would agree with me that those were the pieces that were inside that evidence bag, labeled February 3rd as the date of recovery 5 days after January 29th, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you see that there are some relatively small pieces that were allegedly found on February 3rd, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, Your Honor, I'm continually showing photographs. We can turn the lights on and off, whatever the court's preference is.
You can just tell the court officer when you want the lights turned.
Okay, all right. So they get turned on for like a question or two, and then I turn them back off. But
However you want to do it.
that's fine. All right, so I'd like to contrast some of those pieces with some of the pieces that were found days and weeks later by Michael Proctor. And I'd like to start first with item 7-13. This is, I'd like to display Exhibit 343, which, Mr. Bates, is item 5. You were previously asked about Exhibit 343, which is now displayed on the screen.
Yes.
And that is the first evidence bag submitted by Trooper Proctor, is it not?
So in mine, sorry.
And you know what, let me rephrase that. He submitted evidence bags all at one time, correct?
Yes.
All on 314. So when I said the first evidence bag, I meant the earliest date of collection. I should have asked it that way. February 8th of 2022.
Sure. I don't know all of the dates that each item was collected on.
Okay. But in any case, those, according to the evidence bag that you received, the contents of that bag, which were, again, pieces of plastic, correct?
Pieces of apparent plastic.
Pieces of apparent plastic. Those were found 5 days after the pieces that you previously testified were found by DeChico, right, on February 3rd?
Correct.
All right. And February 8th was now 10 days after January 29th, correct?
Correct.
Can I have displayed Exhibit 346, which is 5A? Okay, looking at Exhibit 346, you will agree with me that this particular piece found on February 8th by Trooper Proctor was quite a bit larger than many of the plastic pieces that had been found by Trooper DeChico 5 days earlier on February 3rd, correct?
I mean, there were a variety of sizes of pieces on the other one, but that is what is that, approximately 4-ish inches?
Right, but my point is, Exhibit 346, what's displayed, that plastic piece, is quite a bit bigger than the small pieces that were contained in DeChico's collection, correct?
Then some of those pieces, yes.
Okay. Now I'd like to move on to item 7-15, and if I could show Exhibit 352, please, which is item 8, Mr. Bates. Okay. Item 7-15, the evidence bag that supports that lists the law enforcement officer who recovered the plastic pieces as Trooper Michael Proctor, correct?
Correct.
And the date of recovery of those pieces was February 11th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
And again, hearkening back to DeChico's evidence bag from February 3rd, this is now 8 days later that these pieces are found, correct?
Correct.
And it's now almost 2 weeks that these pieces are found after January 29th, right? 13 days?
Correct.
All right, if I could show Exhibit 355, which is 8A, Mr. Bates. You would agree with me that this particular piece found by Trooper Proctor on February 11th is also quite a bit larger than those small pieces that were contained in Trooper DeChico's evidence collection, correct, on February 3rd?
Correct.
All right. I'd like to move on to item 7-16, which is number 9, Mr. Bates.
What exhibit number is this, Mr. Vallier?
And this has not yet been introduced, so I'm about to introduce
Okay.
it. And in fact, why don't I do that first?
Okay.
If I can approach the witness.
Sure. And there's no objection to this, Mr. Lally?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
I'll just have the witness identify it and then offer it. Do you recognize what that photo depicts that I've handed to you?
I do.
What is it?
The handwritten label from item 7-16.
Okay. I would offer that, Your Honor.
Okay.
And again, you just identified that as the bag supporting item 7-16, correct?
Correct.
That also lists the law enforcement officer who recovered the plastic pieces as Trooper Michael Proctor, correct?
Correct.
And the date of recovery of those plastic pieces was February 18th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
So Trooper Proctor is now finding these pieces over 2 weeks after the smaller pieces were found by Trooper DeChico, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
February 18th is nearly 3 weeks after January 29th, is it not?
Correct.
All right. If I could show Exhibit 380, which is 9A, Mr. Bates. You would agree with me that this particular piece found by Trooper Proctor on February 18th is also quite a bit larger than those smaller plastic pieces found by Trooper DeChico on February 3rd, correct?
Correct.
This one appears to be about 11 centimeters long, approximately.
Sure.
All right. If I could show Exhibit 376, which is 9B, Mr. Bates. And you would agree with me that this particular piece found by Trooper Proctor on February 18th is also quite a bit larger than those smaller plastic pieces found by Trooper DeChico back on February 3rd, correct?
Correct.
In fact, that appears to be larger than piece that you just identified in Exhibit 380, correct?
The one that was just on the screen?
Right.
Yes.
This one appears to be maybe about 18 centimeters long. Does that seem accurate?
I mean, it's longer than the ruler.
Okay, yeah. Finally, if we could show Exhibit 378, which is 9C, Mr. Bates. You would agree with me that this particular piece found by Trooper Proctor on February 18th is even larger than the last one that we just saw, correct?
In length, yes.
Okay. This appears to be about 19 centimeters long.
I mean, longer than the ruler that's up there.
Okay.
But I have the actual measurement in my notes.
Sure. Well, and the precise measurement's not important. I'm just getting at the relative comparison. This one's certainly quite a bit larger than the smaller pieces found by Trooper DeChico back on February 3rd, correct?
Correct.
This larger piece of red plastic, like the previous two that you just identified, were all found on February 18th, about 3 weeks after January 29th, correct, according to your records?
Correct.
And regarding these last three evidence bags, labeled item number 713, 715, and 716 in February of 2022, from February 8th to the 18th, those were all plastic pieces collected by Michael Proctor, correct?
Correct.
And in addition to collecting those pieces,
You turn the lights on, Ms. Giannetti?
yes, I'm sorry,
Okay. And we can take that down, please?
yes. In addition to collecting those plastic pieces on all those different days, Michael Proctor was also the person to hand deliver those last three evidence bags, all on March 14th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
And you do not know what Michael Proctor did or didn't do with those evidence bags of pieces of taillight prior to March 14th of 2022 when your lab received them, correct?
Objection.
I'm going to sustain it. We've already asked that.
All right. Now, the taillight of that Lexus sits in the housing of the Lexus, the taillight housing, such that part of the taillight faces the rear of the car and part of the taillight loops around and faces the passenger's side of the car, correct?
Sure.
Right? Because it's on the corner.
Sure. Yeah.
You'd agree with me that once you received the final pieces of taillight from Michael Proctor on March 14th, or once your lab received that, you were then able to piece together a majority of the taillight, correct?
So I wasn't assigned this case until later, once everything had already been submitted to the laboratory.
Right. So it was true that after Michael Proctor submitted these pieces of taillight on March 14th, it was after that that you were able to do the reconstruction that you testified about, correct?
Correct.
If I could have Exhibit 432 displayed, which is image 2151, Mr. Bates. That is the reconstruction, the final reconstruction that you were able to do, correct? You would agree with me that there's one section of that taillight that was missing completely, correct?
Correct.
And that missing section is noticeably visible in your reconstruction, is it not?
Yes.
And do you still have that laser pointer there?
I do.
Would you please point to the section of taillight that's missing? Okay. Appears to be a hole on the upper left side of that exhibit.
Is that a question?
Yes, it actually was. I should have said right or correct, but I didn't.
Yes.
Okay. And you would agree with me, and if we could zoom back out, Mr. Bates, you would agree with me that the portion of taillight that you did not have was strictly on the rear side of the taillight, if I can call it that.
I am not sure what orientation that goes on to a car.
Right? But in any case, to this day, you do not know where the pieces that make up that hole are or what happened to them, correct?
I do not.
Let me have a moment.
Okay.
No further questions. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lally?
Your Honor. Now, Mix Vallier, in reference to items 7-17 and 18, the orange T-shirt and the gray sweatshirt, fair to say you never actually physically saw those items, correct?
The clothing? No, I did not.
Now, the debris that was provided, are you familiar with how that process or who got those debris items from those clothing items?
I can look at my notes and tell you who submitted it or who transferred it to our unit.
If you could.
Your witness is ready, Mr. Lally.
I'm sorry. And from your review, who was that person?
Maureen Hartnett.
Now, as far as the 1/8 of an inch by a 1/16 of an inch red and clear apparent plastic pieces that you observed within that debris, that was mixed in with other debris as far as dirt, fibers, things of that nature. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the 1/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch pieces that were contained within that debris, is that something that you observed visually or microscopically or both?
So visually, I take overall pictures of the debris, and then I'll look through the stereo zoom to see if there's anything that looks different, and then I'll take a picture of that. So that is what I did. I looked through the stereo zoom.
Now, as far as the collection of evidence, fair to say you don't know who was a trooper, who was there when they were collected, how many troopers were there when it was collected, when it was collected, anything to do with that, fair to say?
Yes.
And as far as the pieces that you testified to, as far as fitting them mechanically together, all of those pieces then fit mechanically onto the taillight housing taken from the defendant's vehicle, correct?
Correct.
Nothing further.
Okay.
Nothing on that.
All right, Ms. Vallier, you are all set. Thank you very much.